So, welcome to the undergraduate colloquium in visual and in visual culture. The theme is the Wheel of Fortune. This is, as you know, organized by OCADU University Journal of Visual and Critical Studies. First of all, I would like to do a line acknowledgement first. This is the line acknowledgement we have from the journal itself, and is one that I would like to kind of all of us to keep in mind certain points of it, but OCADU University and the Journal of Visual and Critical Studies acknowledge the ancestral and traditional territories of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, who are the original owners and custodians of the land on which we live and create. This land is located on Dish with One Spoon territory, a treaty that describes our agreement to eat from the same dish with one spoon. By living and working on this land, we agree to share the collective responsibility of leaving enough food for others. How we extend this agreement into our land, water, and communities is our responsibility. We also note that the text in this journal, usually in the journal, and also the themes that will appear in our presentations will be spoken, and also most of the stuff we've published is written in English. We acknowledge the English language as a tool of colonialism and hope to find ways to translate, problematize, and reimagine the language we used to create. To this, if any of you would like to acknowledge probably in the chat the lands where you're standing right now, that would be something really wonderful to do. Also, since we're talking about land, I would like to mention that as we are having this gathering, this virtual gathering, now downtown Toronto, there is a solidarity rally happening as well. It's organized by the 1492 Land Back Lane Group. This is in support of the Haudenosaunee land defenders who have been reoccupying a proposed development site for over 50 days in Caledonia at the footsteps of the Six Nations of the Grand River Reserve in southwestern Ontario. So the members of this community have not agreed to have their ancestral land be used for a large housing complex. So I will share the link for further information about this matter and this event on the chat. Well, and also one mention I would like to do to acknowledge all the bodies present here is that we're recording this. So if you don't feel comfortable with that, let us know, and also you feel free to shut off your own your camera as well. To keep going further, I would like to share a bit more about the journal. So here, I think Ryan has introduced a little bit of the whole concept of the program and how the journal emerged as well, but here is more information. The OCAD University Journal of Visual and Critical Study collects and celebrates some of the best undergraduate academic writing at OCAD University, comprising critical essays, exhibition reviews, artist portfolios, creative nonfiction, and thesis abstracts. This anthology reflects the unique approaches to art history and visual culture that are being undertaken at the school. The Journal of Visual and Critical Studies have grown out of the BA annual publication, which was a specific celebration of the works in the Visual and Critical Studies honors program at OCAD. Starting in the autumn of 2017, the publication is expanding to include writing from across all disciplines. We value and emphasize interdisciplinary research, methods, and modes of thinking to provide diverse perspectives on art history and visual culture. The way the journal is run is basically peer-to-peer learning. And that is something that our editorial committee and team value a lot, this kind of sharing knowledge in order to have this teaching and learning process as a collective and everybody kind of in the same level of like we acknowledge everybody's previous learnings, and also kind of to keep with creating this tradition of the journal as well. I would like to thank our 2020 edition editorial committee. You can see the list on the slide, and also our wonderful contributors for their brilliant essays and reviews for the journal. You can also find the names there. That is our latest edition. If you're interested, we'll also be posting more information on how to get one copy of our publication. Well, I would also like to thank the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Science and the School of Interdisciplinary Studies at OCAD for supporting the journal, and also acknowledge that to manage and assemble this publication, we collaborate with OCAD University staff as well, the OCAD Student Union, and with the OCAD Student Press as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, and Greta will talk further about the Wheel of Fortune now. Thank you.
Okay, just gonna pull up my notes. Thank you, Karina, and thank you, Ryan, for the introduction and for the land acknowledgement. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today, and I'd like to extend a thank you to everyone on the Journal Committee for their hard work, and for Ryan White and Charles Reeve and Kirsten Moore for their support in the VCS program, and to our wonderful designer, Lorenzo Ignacio, who did our posters, and Mary Kirkpatrick, whose illustrations are on our poster and the cover of the journal this year. And I'd also like to extend a really warm virtual hug to Karina, our director, who has graduated this year and will be retiring from the committee. So thank you so much, Karina, for your work this year. I am currently located on Lake Watock, Kwak-Wakiwak territory, where I was raised as a settler and have recently returned as a settler and an uninvited guest. And I'd like to express my gratitude to this place and to my family and the community here for sharing nourishment with me and allowing me to continue to live and work here. I'm going to introduce our student panelists and our keynote presenters, Peter Morin and Sameen Mahboubi. But first, I'd like to contextualize the theme of Wheel of Fortune and pose some of the questions we hope to ask when planning for this colloquium. So the theme of the colloquium, Wheel of Fortune, comes from the tarot card with the same name. It's the 10th card in the tarot deck, and it's part of the major arcana, which is the thematic arc in the deck. The Wheel of Fortune card signifies uncertainty, possibility, and renewal of action. In March, when the pandemic began for us in Toronto, I began pulling tarot cards each day to seek some kind of guidance by accessing this knowledge with roots in occult spirituality. While the magic of the tarot cards may seem a little bit esoteric for some, the routine of pulling a card each day and reading the vocabulary of tableau seemed to reflect the shifting ways I was writing, reading, and looking at images. Along with pulling tarot, other routines changed as well. This time of increased interiority and distance from community made space for me to do things like bake sourdough bread or write letters and scroll through Instagram, which I'm sure is pretty common for a lot of folks. All of these habits that developed brought up questions for me around how to bring my body back into my practice of reading and writing, and how to acknowledge the non-human in my practice, be that the living organisms in my sourdough starter or the new virtual space I was occupying on platforms like Instagram and Tumblr even made a return for me. As the pandemic unfolded, a call for community action occurred, and that kind of interiority shifted, I think, towards a time of grief as a call to participate in Black Lives Matter demonstrations began. The pandemic thus has shifted my way of thinking, and I think the way many artists and writers, curators and cultural workers are thinking. The possibility of defunding the police and what that might mean in our future, and the community engagement that has come through learning and unlearning racist practices has offered a platform for growth and care for each other. So the question of this colloquium essentially is, where do we go from here? How have our routines as art workers and cultural practitioners shifted? What new routines have emerged? How has our online presence shifted how we practice? And as these underlying conditions of capitalism, the criminalization of poverty, white supremacy, and racism have been aggravated by the pandemic, how do we find new entry points to work together and to care for each other? Um, our intention as a journal in hosting this colloquium is to open a space of both criticality and of play, to think through the conditions of our moment. Um, and can our attempts for survival act as a possibility for nourishment? So with these questions in mind, big questions, I'll turn over to our keynote presenters, Peter Morin and Sameen Mahboubi. And then after that, we will shift into hearing from student panelists, Ada Adam Berlin, Lena Wu, and Max Holzberg. And then we'll have a little question period. And right before the question period, we'll kind of go over some house rules for that. But in the meantime, just keep your mics muted and we'll get to you if you have any questions. And you're welcome to leave questions in the chat as well. So Sameen and Peter, I'm turning things to you.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
It's really exciting to be present today, and I also want to extend my gratitude and thanks to the folks, the organizing folks and the program. Also want to just acknowledge the ancestors who are here with us, the ancestors in the room, and also I think I just want to also acknowledge the folks who aren't in the room with us. And just take a moment to just be present to that as well. And thank you to Sameen for agreeing to do this with me. It's been a lot of good and interesting learning.
Yeah, it's been fun, honestly. I'm learning a lot from you, and I feel like we're learning through each other a little bit.
Yes, we are, yeah. And so we have co-authored a paper together and thinking about the questions that Greta just shared with us. And I think it's time. It's time.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. The title of the paper is "A Wheel of Fortune is a Wheel That is Turning." To start, this is a shared keynote.
Across ancestries.
Across ages.
And because of COVID-19, across fluid physical space.
Directly interrogates the colonial manifest destiny that informs our shared and non-white experiences of this place, now known as Canada.
We are forced to experience these complications and solutions together.
We reach across these complexities and reach through how these complexities affect our ancestral bodies and cultures, especially with regards to our thinking, making, research, and work.
This shared keynote forwards a decolonial address directed, aimed, and I don't mind aiming at colonialism, at a power that attempts to separate our richness and aims our shared space towards negotiating these complexities. Complexities concerned with decolonial strategies, methodologies inside of the academy, research, thinking, or making.
A tarot deck is an older idea.
It's an older knowledge system.
It is still searching for how to become one with the world, which could be and should be regarded as theory.
A wheel of fortune, one card within the organizational system, is an intersecting vector within all of the madness.
It is a question and it is an embodiment.
A turning wheel is actually one of the older ideas for many places and people of the world, samsara.
A turning wheel. Karma, a turning wheel.
Tricksters, a turning wheel.
I have a bio that says I am a grandson of Tahltan artists. I am also a son of Janelle Craig and Pierre Morin. Janelle Craig is a Crow clan matriarch of the Tahltan Nation. It is through her that I received this privilege and am allowed to say the words, Crow clan member. This privilege comes with responsibilities. I need to make sure that I follow her example, and I need to make sure my actions, behavior, and offerings are the best I can make them to be. My father is Pierre Morin. He is from Thetford Mines, Quebec. From him, I learned how to work hard for my family. From him, I learned how to take chances. I think, I read, I teach, I make jokes. I have had the privilege of being a practicing artist in this place now known as Canada for 20 plus years. And every time I say that out loud, I can't believe it. In my work, all of my work, I prioritize Tahltan ways of being and knowing. I do this because it's important. I also do this because it helps me to feel safe in Canada. Actually, it's better to say that I try with my efforts to contribute to safer and braver and shared spaces. And also, safe is only one part of the experience of being safe. The word is not the end of the conversation. Safe happens on a spectrum. These days, as I get older, I want to honor the gifts that our mother shared with us, with me. She raised 4 children, helped to raise 10 more, worked to support her family, worked to support her sibling group of 14, had 4 extra jobs so that she could buy us all of the things, and not feel sad or guilty or afraid about those purchases because we were actually poor. I prioritize direct action against injustice, racism, oppression in the classroom, and sometimes I'm good at it, and sometimes I fail at it. I have the privilege of standing with a circle of strong teachers, elders, makers, thinkers, scholars, people like my best friend, Ayumi Goto, Ashok Mathur, Shirley Bear, David Melville, Cheryl Arondel, Haruka Okano. I have chosen to read and research across the world and to look towards the dedicated works of Indigenous, Black, Asian, queer, trans, folks of color, thinkers and makers, folks like Toni Morrison, Kenzaburo Oi, Alice Walker, Ben Okri, Ashish Nandi, Changyag Trungpa, Shu Bing. I'm writing these names, a few of the many, because it's important to reach out to the world. And I practice the theory that indigeneity meets the world first, and that the work of meeting the world requires work.
Hi everyone. My name is Sameen Mahboubi. I'm a student here at OCAD. I'm trying to learn through memory. I'm trying to learn through trauma. I'm a child of refugees, and I'm trying to stratify diaspora and settler identity. I watch them work their whole lives and never escape their trauma. They're trying to learn how to do better. I'm a co-founder of a DIY art space in Toronto, and I'm trying to make art as accessible as possible in the space. It's called Hearth. It was founded with 3 other young emerging artists. It's a gallery in a garage. And we saw that there wasn't space for emerging artists in Toronto where we felt represented. We wanted to focus on the work of emerging queer folk, Black and Indigenous artists, and other people of color. I think one of the goals of Hearth is also to try and reimagine art spaces as public space. What does it mean to show art without any funding? What does it mean to pay artists out of your pocket with no institutional oversight? Like, what if you treat a gallery like a library? If someone comes in from the neighborhood who needs to stop in and see some work, why shouldn't they be able to? If someone needs to sit and have a cup of water in an atmosphere that feels safe and inviting. They should be comfortable doing that. I think that we fundamentally believe that there shouldn't be any barrier to entry for seeing art because it feels instinctually human to make art. So we're not interested in engaging with the closed doors of the art world. Pardon me, of the art world.
So throughout this process of collaboration between us, we try to answer some questions. Yeah. So this is the first question.
The first one, yeah. What is a keynote? I don't have a good answer, but we thought of this keynote as the beginning, an anchor. You know, it's the start of a conversation. It's not just the beginning of a colloquium, but it's also the beginning of a discussion, one between Peter and myself, but also one between all 25 of us here, 28.
And we asked each other, what do we expect from this keynote? And this keynote, this shared space, addresses our inherited tools, and our ancestors' tools, tools that are activated by Sameen and I for building a future for our actual bodies, and not just our bodies that are covered up by systemic racism. We take these tools to build something, to become something that can hold space, and that can hold the space. Thinking about thinking about the house. Audre Lorde gifted us with the often quoted, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." This statement lives inside a paragraph that lives inside an incredible speech shared with us, future listeners, future readers, by Audre Lorde in 1979. Her speech, a response and a reflection of her experience at the New York University Institute for Humanities Conference in 1978. A keynote reflection on the systems of power which still endeavor to silence our voices, our bodies, and our respective ancestries. Most of us here might only be familiar with the quote pulled from the body of the speech. And if that's the case, I hope you all look towards this incredible Black, queer, feminist, socialist, scholar, activist, poet mother, Audre Lorde, and her offerings to you, to us, and to the future us. And she says, for the paragraph for today, for the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. Racism and homophobia are real conditions of all of our lived lives in this place and time. I urge each one of us here to reach down into that deep place of knowledge inside herself and touch that terror and loathing of any difference that lives there. See whose face it wears. And then the personal as political can begin to illuminate all of our choices.
Our next question was, what does a keynote offer? And I thought that a keynote offers a foundation and an entry point. It offers a look into what Peter and I are thinking about and what we're talking through. It also serves to explore ideas. The main one we focused on were ancestral lineage and decolonialism. I have two quotes that have been on my mind recently. The first is by Shireen Nisset. She's an Iranian filmmaker, a photographer, an artist, and a rebel. Her quote was that every Iranian artist, in one form or another, is political, and that politics have defined our lives. I think that this quote rings true to me. It does feel almost integral to Iranian identity, especially of Iranians of my generation, who are we're the direct descendants of revolutionaries, basically people who fought to topple a government. We're the descendants of fighters. We're the descendants of warriors. You know, it also feels especially true for diasporic Iranians who live in a duality. Like it feels like my body was politicized the moment I was born in Canada, and I've never really been able to escape it. Um, I feel fortunate to be living here in North America at the crux of a revolution, but for me, Canada's bads outweigh the goods. It's kind of at a point where I can no longer ignore the guilt of living on stolen land, which I feel like I could have when I was younger or when less aware. Um, the thought that I can't take a step without a hit on my consciousness is kind of overwhelming now, and I think that's what we're all fighting for, hopefully in one way or another. It pointed me to another quote by Gamal Abdel Nasser, who is an Egyptian anti-imperialist. He was a revolutionary leader, which was, "What was taken by force can only be restored by force." Uh, this is just, I feel like, a factual statement. Decolonizing your brain and society is good, but decolonizing the land is better.
That's so great. So this leads us to the question, what happens when the wheel turns? Our shared considerations of power, pathways, and shared keynotes also considers knowledge as discourse. I mean, we are at a university. Art history is discourse and is shaped and reshaped by discourse, and who has access to that discourse? Power is also shaped. Power flows through systems. Power is activated and displayed by bodies who receive tools to activate that power for their own benefits. Systemic. But there is a line crossing, a line here. Please pay attention. There's also a glimmer or echo of the colonization of these territories now known as Canada. And we, along with many other folks of color, are embodying our respective historical knowledges, learning these colonial systems, language, practice, references, power, citation, etc., and adapting our respective knowledges to talk about how discourse and systems historicize and prioritize Europe and manipulate these flows of ancestral power. A line from one of my favorite movies. That's not power, Ray. That's paper. Ray. Power is a rainstorm. Power is that river right there. And that's what I have to protect, not the white law. The film is called Thunderheart. It was one of the first major releases which featured Indigenous content, Indigenous actors, and significant Indigenous activist history. It was released in 1992. And then this leads me to another question. Discourse for whom? Which leads me to another question. Do you know where your power comes from? And also we recognize that Foucault, the book is called Archaeology of Knowledge, written in 1969, and many French German theorists who take up so much space within academia know nothing about Indigenous power, Iranian power, Asian power, South Asian power, Black power, queer power, trans power. And I acknowledge that this list is just a beginning, and it is not the end of the conversation.
So how do we recognize the effects of the turning wheel? I am recognizing the effect of a turning wheel by quoting an 800-year-old Iranian man who I'd never bothered to read until Googling Iranian quotes last week. Saadi wrote a couplet in medieval Persia, and there was a lot of really bad translations, but I picked the least cringy one I could find. I'll read it. The sons of Adam are limbs of each other, having been created of one essence. When the calamity of time affects one limb, the other limbs cannot remain at rest. If you have no sympathy for the troubles of other, you are unworthy to be called by the name of a human. So this extremely dramatic poem helped me expand my own ideas towards ideas of communalism, thinking about sharing, thinking about how I've tried to base my life and work around ideas of exchange. And it doesn't mean monetary exchange, it doesn't mean intellectual exchange, but emotional exchange, instinctual exchange. Communalism means that I feel what others feel, and I need to feel for everyone around me the same way I feel for myself. I'm no less deserving of respect or dignity than any other human on this continent or on any continent. Um, I've always thought the main thing that makes us instinctually human is a sense of wonder, never knowing where to go or what is coming next. I felt lost my whole life. At this point, I've just accepted it as a human condition. And this quote, this ancestor, this wheel, is turning me around and reminding me to look back both towards myself, but also forward towards others. Turning back onto myself is leading me to examine the term decolonialism and decipher what it means for me. It's something I had to come to terms with, I think, in my late teens, especially. It was a time when I was, I think, really working through trauma. I was like really suffering. I was kind of stuck in my ways, really stubborn, refusing to grow, refusing to learn. I had friends who would share their experiences with me of trauma and like racism and anything. And like I was also having those experiences, but kind of refusing to acknowledge them as anything other than circumstance and not really looking at the big picture. And I think that I'd fallen victim to something that a lot of people fall victim to in a place like Canada, which is something I had to like violently unlearn at the time, which is kind of how institutional racism and colonialism sort of force you to assimilate like culturally, but also they enter your brain and warp it in a way. Um, and it kind of reminded me that decolonialism as a concept always starts inwardly and kind of, I guess I'll call it mental colonialism, is one of the feels like it really needs to be treated. It means that you forfeit your ancestors. It means that you forget your stories. It almost means leaving your diaspora. And obviously there's lots of nuance, but I know for me, turning towards my ancestors, turning towards familial stories and learning decolonial languages were really important steps for like very important first steps, I should say, for like unlearning patriarchy, learning to reject colonial gender norms, finding the humanity in people around me, and seeing everyone as equal.
And it still feels like all roads apparently lead to colonial Rome. And since the Roman roads remain physically, intellectually, and conceptually, we learn that colonialism builds roads, not pathways, not trails, not routes through the bush. We also learn that there's still a lot of work to do. A Roman wagon wheel, turning, 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 pulled a lot of things into this current future. I continually return to something my wonderful friend Marie Cote told me when we both attended an artist residency in Dawson City, Yukon. Dawson City is quite far north. Anyway, so she told me that the roads, like the human-made roads, are scars on the land. She also told me that animal beings know how to travel on the land, that we should have followed their pathways more closely. Marie Cote is an experimental ceramicist whose one project was about making sounding vessels for the wind to travel through. It was a beautiful project. The idea here is to start focusing on sharing space with another person, but that also includes the non-human beings, respectfully, and sharing space with more than one person at a time. The idea is to acknowledge that many of us have ancestors who stand with us, who have stood with us beyond this particular moment, have stood with us actually in all moments, and have adapted themselves to continue to work with us on our behalf for our wholeness. The classroom is not one person speaking to another person. The artwork is not one person speaking to another person. The art history is not one art history speaking for everyone. Sameen and I met during a class, Issues in First Nations Arts, one of the courses that I get to teach with the Indigenous Visual Culture program. The class prioritizes Indigenous methodologies, pedagogies for transmission of knowledge. In my case, Taltan, a shifting fluid influx, an opening up of space. Indigenous knowledge and practice within the institution opens up space, keeping in mind that institutions at this point have coded language for research, making theory, systemic racism, oppression, white privilege discourse. Our privileging of Indigenous methodologies opened up a space for Sameen to share a story about his mother's love of Buffy St. Marie, a story he will tell later on. At this point, also at this point, I'm directing my comments at European universities, not those centers of learning which find their roots in territories like Northern Africa, South America, Australia. A prioritization of Indigenous knowledges creates a fluid space and recreates the possibilities of dreaming inside of these European universities. That space, decolonized space. First, you have to consider that decolonization, if you're doing it right, should really hurt. These institutions need to feel that hurt. Decolonization also means that you can't unsee the previously unseen. It is a dismantling of your own privileges, which really becomes intriguing when you consider that the university education is a privilege. Decolonization is a daily action, and it is a practice, and its practice makes a space for possibility. And these systemic privileges have to be pulled from your body like a wrong colored Band-Aid. Research, making, thinking, theory should not solely be an extractive action, colonial action, but should be prioritized as reciprocal, Indigenous-centered, fluid, and filled with possibilities.
One thing I've been thinking about throughout this talk kind of coming together was, honestly, I didn't know a lot about tarot, so I was thinking about the root etymology of the term, and it's apparently unclear, but they can trace it to an Italian slang word from the 15th century, which was taroch, I think, which means to be foolish. You know, it reminds me that it feels foolish to trust institutions' empty gestures towards decolonizing Canada. You know, at this moment in the last 6 months, there's been a lot of very public support of like almost anti-capitalist messages from companies and like decolonizing messages from like our government, and you know, it's just obviously not true or real, and like unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, but they still say land acknowledgements. But they, who are like, I don't know. It just feels like such an oxymoron to me.
We need to start thinking about how vulnerable thinking makes us feel. When did failure to have good ideas become a failure to demonstrate thinking skill? Where did these wrong ideas come from? There has to be a way to stop making thinking intimidating. I also want to say that I'm not afraid of theory. We are offering today these critiques and this dismantling and this conversation and this opening up of space, because theory makes possibility. And when I start to feel unnerved inside of these complicated rooms, spaces, ideas, keynotes, I return to bell hooks, theory as liberatory practice, from the book Teaching to Transgress, 1994. And bell hooks writes, I came to theory because I was hurting. The pain within me was so intense that I could not go on living. I came to theory desperate, wanting to comprehend, to grasp what was happening around and within me. Most importantly, I wanted the hurt to go away. I saw in theory, then, a location for healing.
As Peter referenced earlier, I do have a story about Buffy St. Marie. Well, she's kind of tangentially related to it, but basically when my great aunt was 24 years old, she started a neighborhoods kind of children class in Iran where she taught about religious diversity. And Iran is an Islamic theocracy. So in that governmental system, I think the ruling class keeps power by ensuring that their religion is a majority. And they felt that these neighborhood children's classes were dangerous. So they raided a series of Baha'i homes. So that's the faith that my family belongs to. And they arrested 10 women. The youngest of these women was 16, and her name was Mona. And the 10 women were imprisoned and tortured until they were eventually sentenced to death. Their imprisonment was heard about internationally, and actually at the time, like the American president called for clemency. But in 1983, I know that was not about Buffy, but in 1983, a group of Canadian musicians wrote a protest song about this thing, which is really cool because it is about my aunt, basically my great aunt. And Buffy St. Marie was in it. So this was like obviously a really traumatic moment for my family and my mom. Her aunt was about her age; they were best friends. And when she was murdered, and there was nothing that my mom could do about it. But I think the timeline is really cool because it was actually my mom immigrated here a year after that, and they knew about the song from where they were. Uh, and I think it was really deeply reassuring to my mom and my family that there was people in the place they were coming to that actually cared about their trauma and about their experiences and about, you know, their struggle. Um, and after, Buffy became almost an obsession in our household, which was really cool because we didn't listen to a lot of Western music at home. It just wasn't something my parents had any frame of reference for. But Buffy was always beloved, and like our household always, she always held a special place for us. It's cool to grow up with those ideas from such a young age, I think.
So great. Buffy is always beloved, absolutely. And the word indigenous should just be the start of the conversation, not the end of the conversation. Your use of the word indigenous does not indicate that you should not indicate that you know concretely anything about the experiences of indigenous people, indigenous family, indigenous histories. It should be an opening. It should be the way to begin to reach across. Indigenous knowledges create world. Worlds include artwork, stories, design, beadwork, philosophy. This list could also go on and on and on.
I was reminded this week because I was thinking about these empty gestures that I was talking about, and of course, Canada 150 came to the forefront of my mind. During those festivities that was happening in Ottawa, water protectors from Badawanting, they set up the reoccupation teepee on Capitol Hill. And I mean, I was like aware of these issues, but I guess I wasn't paying attention because I never knew that Justin Trudeau showed up to this teepee completely unannounced, and he was wearing a jean jacket that said 150 years young on it. And there's a video of him sitting in this teepee and like talking to these like indigenous youth. And he's like, listen, kids, I'm prepared to move Canada beyond colonial structures. I'm ready to do it. And they were like, okay, you can start by abolishing the Indian Act. And he was like, that's great. I'll do it. And then they're like, cool, when are you going to start? And he's like, as soon as you guys figure it out, I will start doing that. And then he just leaves. And it was one of the strangest things I've ever seen in my life. It really feels like the state is like in the midst of crumbling and they know it, but they're like trying to be hip, but I don't know. Sorry, it was shocking.
That is shocking. And this is really a process too, hey? It's like thinking, it's been really a great privilege to think across this fluid Zoom Teams reality with you, Sameen. And I think I realized working definitions of colonization and decolonization don't work at this moment in time. Even the working definitions and the work, two efforts, consistently need to be interrogated, dismantled, reassembled, and tried out again. For those interested, my working definitions are colonization is the forced removal of resources from indigenous territories. Resources include and are not limited to the minerals under the ground, resources on the territory, the land, indigenous thought, indigenous philosophy, indigenous medicine, indigenous material object, and indigenous material technologies. And finally, resources also include indigenous bodies. Decolonization, my working definition, is the active interrogation and dismantling of the powers and privileges that you receive as a result of colonization. In teaching, I've realized that my working definitions now have become part of the discourse of the institution that I am, the institutions that I have been and currently am aligned with. And therefore, I need to remake them again. I've realized that I have to transform them to center the non-human beings. At the beginning of time, the non-human beings chose to put us human beings at the center. And I think it's time to pay attention and return their acknowledgement of us.
We talked about band-aid solutions to capitalism in our research, such as UBI, like Universal Basic Income. And I mean, Wheel of Fortune, colloquium, we couldn't go without mentioning the game show. So it did lead me to think about the way that game shows work as kind of another band-aid. Because there is, I mean, this is relevant to everyone here, except the adults, but well, we're adults. There's a game show called Pay It Off, where you play for the chance to have your like student loans paid off, which just feels so evil to me. Like they are obviously pitting extremely poor people against each other. Like they're like dangling a carrot in front of them that's like, this will change your life, but like you have to jump into like a puddle of pudding in order to get it. I don't know. That it's exhausting. Life. On the note of not exhausting things, we're at the end, but I did have a final thought, which was that I was reading. Do you guys? I don't know if anyone knows the comic Nancy. It's like it used to be an old comic, and now they have like a young, hip person writing it, and it's really like good. And there was a 6 or 7 panel one that they released recently where Nancy was talking about if rainbows were prettier before people thought they were magic and not science. And it's not really relevant, but I was thinking about it a lot because it feels it feels like it's such a special idea. And I have spent this whole summer looking after my niece and two nephews, and the oldest is 6, so they're very young. And um, all summer, I've been asking them what things they think are magic and what things they think are science. And you would be amazed, or maybe not, to learn that everything is magic to them. And it is so beautiful. And I want, I feel like my ideal decolonial future is one where everything is magic again and nothing feels like science.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the best place to end off. That the future can be filled and full of magic and possibility. And we were talking about Wheel of Fortune, and I was sitting there watching Wheel of Fortune with my parents almost every day. And I just think that there's a place there for so much more magic. Thank you for this time, Sameen.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody.